Let's talk about this exchange between Senator Chris Van Hollen and Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem, because on the surface it looks like another tense committee hearing moment. But underneath it, there's a much bigger issue playing out.
Senator Van Hollen.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chairman. Madam Secretary, it's good to see you.
Good to see you, too.
And I was glad to see in your recent testimony that you reaffirmed your obligations to uphold the Constitution of the United States. And I understand you had an exchange with Senator Murphy on the Abrego Garcia case. And so I'm just going to put the question directly to you. Are you or DHS doing anything to comply with the 9-0 Supreme Court order to facilitate his return to the United States? Just yes or no.
This administration is following all federal court orders.
Madam Secretary, this is a simple question.
It's the president's prerogative on conversations that happen with the president of El Salvador.
I ask a simple question. We have a limited amount of time. I just asked you, Madam Secretary, whether or not you or the Department of Homeland Security are taking any action to facilitate the 9-0 Supreme Court decision to facilitate his return. This is a very simple question. Are you taking any action to facilitate his return, or are you not?
This administration is following and complying with all federal court orders to make sure that we.
So you are because the court ordered that you facilitate his return. So you are facilitating his return.
Sir, Senator, thank you for the question. But what I would tell you is that we are following court orders, and that your advocacy for a known terrorist is alarming to me.
Madam Secretary,
it's alarming to me because he's a human smuggler.
Madam Secretary, I'm going to have to reclaim
a terrorist, and he's not a U.S. citizen. He's a citizen of El Salvador, and he's home. If he were to come back
Madam
here,
Secretary,
we would take him immediately.
All right,
back
I'm going to have to, Madam Secretary, you should know a couple facts then, which is, number one, in 2019, the immigration court said that he should not be returned to El Salvador because it would put his life in danger. The Trump administration at the time did not appeal that decision. After that, he got a work permit and was working legally in the United States of America. This is also why the district court and the appellate court and the Supreme Court have ruled as they have. I suggest that rather than make these statements here, that you and the Trump administration make them in court under oath, because despite what you just said, the federal district court whose judge is hearing this case right now said, and I'm quoting, that the administration has provided no evidence linking Abrego Garcia to MS-13 or any other terrorist activity. I'm not vouching for the man. I'm vouching for his due process rights.
Yes, you are, sir. You've been vouching for
Madam
him.
Secretary, with
respect. I would
respect,
suggest that you defend and stand alongside the victims of illegal crime.
This is political rhetoric.
The citizens who live here and are United States Americans. I would suggest you advocate for them as hard as you do. Madam Secretary,
I know you're doing a political speech here. I get it. I'm asking questions of law. No, you're just spewing rhetoric.
I truly believe this. I
truly believe this rhetoric. As an American. Let me ask you this: Do you agree with Justice Scalia in the Supreme Court opinion in Reno v. Flores that, I'm quoting, "It is well established that the Fifth Amendment entitles aliens to due process of law in deportation proceedings." End of quote.
Sir, we are utilizing every due process tool that this Congress has afforded us. Congress decides what due process is appropriate for every situation. Expedited removal is a due process that you have afforded us that we are utilizing. The Alien Enemies Act.
I'm going to reclaim my time, Madam Secretary.
So we are giving due process and using the tools that this Congress has given us.
This is really, I'm asking sort of simple questions of law, and simple questions like, are you complying with the 9-0 Supreme Court decision? And you seem to think that's some kind of trick question. Let me ask you this. You were down at CCOT in El Salvador, and you said, and that, I'm quoting, "It is one of the tools in the toolkit that we will use." And it's well known that the Trump administration is paying the government of El Salvador to keep these individuals, including those who the U.S. courts have determined were illegally taken out of the country in violation of their due process rights. Have you seen the grant document between the United States and the government of El Salvador with respect to the CCOT?
It's important that everybody knows the consequences of what happens for their actions in this country. When you break the law and you're a member of a foreign terrorist
Secretary, I asked you a
organization,
question. Have you seen the document? This is not hard.
Yes, I have.
Okay. And what are the provisions of the document? So do you know what entities in El Salvador are receiving the funds?
I'm sure you can see this document as well and have looked at it for evaluation.
I'm glad you raised that, Madam Secretary, because I sent you a letter along with many of my colleagues here on April 8th asking for, among other things, that document. Will you respond to the letter that we sent?
I will respond to your letter.
Thank you. Can I get some sense of when?
We will take a look at it. I don't remember seeing your letter yet, but I will certainly take a look at it.
Well, it's been there over a month.
The senator's time has expired.
No, Madam Chair.
Senator Kennedy?
Madam Chair.
Yes. Madam Secretary.
The Secretary, I have some additional questions.
No, sir, that's up to you to manage that time. Senator Kennedy.
Madam Secretary.
I need a little help from a chair that respects the members of the committee. I'm sorry, Madam Chair.
Van Hollen starts in a pretty straightforward way. He's calm, polite, even cordial. He reminds Secretary Noem that she has publicly reaffirmed her obligation to uphold the Constitution. That's not an insult. That's a setup. He's grounding the conversation in shared principles before asking a very simple, very specific question. Is DHS doing anything to comply with a 9-0 Supreme Court order requiring the government to facilitate the return of Abrigo Garcia to the United States? Yes or no? And this is where things immediately go off the rails. Instead of answering the question directly, Secretary Noem falls back on a familiar talking point. This administration is following all federal court orders. That sounds reassuring, but notice what's missing. It's not an answer. Van Hollen presses again because the court order isn't abstract. It's explicit. Facilitate his return. Again, instead of a direct response, Noem deflects, this time invoking presidential prerogative and foreign conversations with El Salvador. That's when Van Hollen does what lawmakers are supposed to do. He reclaims his time and narrows the question even further. Are you taking any action to facilitate his return, or are you not? At this point, the tension spikes, because rather than clarifying compliance, Noem pivots hard. She accuses Van Hollen of advocating for a known terrorist and a human smuggler. That's a serious allegation, and it completely changes the tone of the hearing. Here's the problem. That claim doesn't match what the courts have said. Van Hollen comes prepared with receipts. He points out that an immigration court ruled back in 2019 that Abrigo Garcia should not be returned to El Salvador because his life would be in danger. The Trump administration didn't appeal that decision. After that, he was granted a work permit and lived legally in the U.S. And then comes the most damning part. Van Hollen quotes the federal district judge currently overseeing the case, who explicitly said the administration has provided no evidence linking Abrigo Garcia to MS-13 or any terrorist organization. That's not a political opinion. That's a judicial finding. Van Hollen makes something very clear here, and it's a distinction that matters. He's not vouching for the man's character. He's vouching for his due process rights. And that's where this exchange really exposes the fault line. Because when Secretary Noem responds, she reframes the entire debate away from constitutional law and toward political rhetoric, talking about victims of crime, illegal immigration, and foreign terrorists. Those are emotionally charged issues, but they don't answer the legal question on the table. Due process isn't a favor. It's not something the government grants when it feels generous. It's a constitutional requirement. Van Hollen even brings up Justice Scalia, hardly a liberal icon, quoting Reno v. Flores, where the Supreme Court affirmed that the Fifth Amendment entitles non-citizens to due process in deportation proceedings. That should have been common ground. Instead, Noem responds by arguing that Congress defines what due process looks like, pointing to expedited removal and other statutory tools. And while that's partially true, it sidesteps the issue again. Courts, not agencies, decide when the government has violated due process. Then we get to El Salvador. Van Hollen raises a deeply troubling point. The U.S. is paying the Salvadoran government to detain individuals, including some whom U.S. courts have already said were unlawfully removed. He asks a basic oversight question. Has she seen the grant document related to detention at CECOT, and who exactly is receiving the funds? Once again, the answers are evasive. She confirms she's seen the document, but doesn't meaningfully explain its provisions. Oversight hits a wall. And this is where we need to zoom out. What made this exchange so striking wasn't the raised voices or the sharp words. It was how hard it was to get a straight answer to a yes or no constitutional question. When a senator asks whether the executive branch is complying with a unanimous Supreme Court ruling, that should not be controversial. This isn't about defending one individual. It's about whether court orders mean what they say. It's about whether accusations replace evidence. And it's about whether constitutional protections apply consistently or only when they're politically convenient. Van Hollen wasn't grandstanding here. He was doing oversight. He was asking the government to explain, on the record, how it reconciles its actions with binding court rulings. The fact that those questions were met with deflection and character attacks should concern anyone who cares about the rule of law. Because once due process becomes optional for some people, it becomes fragile for everyone. If you believe courts should matter, if you think constitutional rights shouldn't depend on who's popular or unpopular, then this exchange should stick with you. Let me know what you think down in the comments. Was Van Hollen right to keep pressing, or was this just political theater? Don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and share this with someone who cares about accountability. I'll see you in the next one.